So we can take a couple of questions. Please, Christoph.
Thank you. Very interesting thoughts. However, I would like to question the underlying assumption. I were to argue that AI, as it is by today, will help in that domain only in one perspective, and this is in the sensing part. So in perceiving more information and digesting it, and so helping to provide perhaps the basis of better decisions. In the other parts of that game, which so far worked quite good, so this planning and acting, AI technology as we know it by today is not applicable due to some basic limitations. So if we think about what tool of AI, what methodology we could pick for exactly that problem, so machine learning pops into mind, of course. However, machine learning is data-driven. So we know we need a lot of data, a lot of examples, and this means millions of cases to learn from. So in the area of nuclear deterrence we had so far, we lack this training base. And so that you can classify examples as good and which worked out and worked not. So we have not enough instances to learn from. You could argue that, okay, we could enrich that by building simulation tools like Google did with Go. However, then you work on your own world model. And but the reality and the outside world is an open environment. And even configurations like Go, it's very complex, still a finite search space. Reality is different. So you run, if you try to learn, then to learn your model, this is quite different from reality. And so the results might be rather different as well, which might lead to a less successful path in the play of deterrence. And if we pick other algorithms, like logical-based or so, this political game, as you named it correctly, I think, is needs some higher order reasoning, which is very difficult to implement. It's in the general case not decidable because the search space is too complex. So to conclude that, AI might be useful for preparing some decision, for digesting data, and for specific decision support. However, in relying in that very essential part of politics in AI, we have not the tools to really use it expertly in that planning and acting domain. So I would rather refrain from it. But still interesting thoughts. Thanks for that.
Thank you. I actually agree with you on the difficulty in applying AI in the political dimension of the nuclear deterrence. And the reasons as I explained. And the question is, to what sort of role that AI could play? Then my take is that ISL is the area where AI could be applied. And that is, for example, now, when you find the North Korean non-compliance in the IAEA safeguards or agreement with the United States, then many researchers use satellite images to detect irregular move on the site of the fuel production facilities. And if you use AI with the data processing, the time for the detecting abnormal moves is very much shortened. So then if you have a capability of detecting the other side of a non-compliance with the rules, then you try to point that you guys are in non-compliance. And so knowing that the other side try to refrain conducting sort of non-compliance activities. So that is one improve if both sides have that capabilities. But if only one side has, then the other side feel the vulnerability. So if you are in a vulnerable position, then you have a strong temptation to use the capabilities first before being attacked. And so this kind of that logic is maybe must be pursued. But on top of that, maybe, you know, as a political, as an advisor to decision making, what sort of a data AI should provide, or what the decision maker should rely on the AI, that is also another issue that we have to maybe kind of research more.
Kind of two questions. One has to do with one of the problems with nuclear deterrence, because it's a threat of retaliation. If a first strike is made, I will retaliate. Right? That's what deterrence is. So that de-incentivizes the first strike. So the most credible way of doing that is to establish what's called a tripwire, where I say that you launch a first strike, my retaliation is automatic, and it's out of my hands. That makes for the most credible deterrent. All right? It's out of my hands. So you got to know that if you do that first strike, you're going to get that response. And you don't have to, you know, issues relating to whether I'll get second thoughts will not come into play. You're assured. But the problem is that that sort of system, although it increases the credibility, on the one hand, the risks of accidental reaction are greatly increased. That's why tripwires are standardly not used. You know, if there's been a misidentification, there hasn't been a first strike, but for some reason it seems like there's been one, and then the tripwire comes in, there's no human agent. That's an extremely dangerous situation. So there is a worry that the introduction of AI in detection of a nuclear first strike could make people more confident that a tripwire could work without accidents, without accidental response. Okay, so that's a dangerous thing. So I just want to know what your thoughts are about that. But then there's a whole other area of inquiry that could be useful to go into. Positive side of AI, it's this, if you want to have a nuclear-free world, there's always the problem of reinvention. You eliminate all nuclear warheads, but then, you know, people know how to build them. So how to prevent someone from remaking a nuclear weapon after all the others have been eliminated and getting that advantage. So you're going to need very sophisticated verification techniques worldwide to figure out when dual-use technologies are kind of passing over the line. So maybe AI could provide strengthened verification systems that would make, you know, a nuclear-free world more conceivable. Because there are opponents of a nuclear-free world because they think it's just the weapon can always be reinvented. And so we don't even want to go there. We just need to stay in a condition of deterrence. But this may provide a key to getting around that. So that's...
Yes, thank you. I actually agree with you on that two points. On this tripwire question, I sometimes think of the situation in Cuban Missile Crisis. In that case, the United States set a red line. If the Soviet vessel cross this line, then they sort of initiate the attacks against the vessel, Soviet vessels. Then the Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, actually didn't do that. So if he followed the automatic, you know, tripwire kind of decisions, then you know, we may not have been existed now, right? So that's why I think the current theory of deterrence, strategic ambiguity, is important, and also that may give a kind of a room for the maneuvering between two to negotiate on the mutually agreeable sort of a settlement of such a tension. And then if AI will be introduced, then in a weaponry systems, like in the case of Russian recent development of nuclear-propelled, nuclear-equipped unmanned submarines, then because of the lack of the capability of communication they have to have like an automatic tripwire, and that may increase the risk of accidental nuclear war. So I think we have to be really careful about introduction of AI into the automatic decision systems. And secondly, verification, I agree with you, and that maybe on top of that, I think verification capability would help the checking the export controls, and also nuclear forensics, which is to detect where the origin of nuclear materials which was used in the nuclear terrorism. So I think there are a lot of ways to utilize that AI for the good purposes.
Okay, thank you. Nobumasa, your presentation opened up a lot of additional aspects which I hadn't thought about so far. I would like to get out of the technological debate back to ethics and morale and connect your presentation to what Greg and Henrik have told us. They have proposed virtue ethics and especially emphasized moderation and courage. What do you make of this, given the topic which you have discussed? Is it a guiding yardstick? Greg and Henrik, let me address you and ask why you picked virtual ethics. And isn't Christian morale going far beyond moderation and courage as guiding principles? I, in the early afternoon, confess the ethical framework which you have put on the table does personally for me not go far enough to deal with the issues before us. It can deal with some of the technical aspects, but not much more. So maybe you can, both parties can react. Applicability of what they said and questioning what you said, to be very clear.
Thank you. I think I'm not capable of answering to this difficult question, but that reminds me of the question of universality of the value systems. In fact, when we say it's right, the righteousness, in international politics, we say the opposite of the righteousness is another righteousness. And also, if you compare the sense of compliance with international norms between the United States and, for example, Syria, right? So their way of commitment to the international norms is so different. So there are all different types of value systems. Then, so question is, which value systems are we going to employ? And this universalization of value systems is really possible. And if the objectives of war or a fight, nuclear deterrence, or any conflict is to win the political games or strategic games, then based upon the national interest, what would be the constraint to be put onto the other state actors? And then are they willing to lose if they are in compliance with the values or the norms? Or are they going to abandon such the attitude to commitment to the virtues? So without agreeing on this attitude and way of ensuring that all states involved, then there is always a risk of betrayal. And that is probably accelerated, that this concern is probably accelerated or amplified by the introduction of AI, because this shortened decision system and you face a more kind of time-pressing environment where you have to make a decision, and you may tend to abandon such a virtue if you are really facing a crisis of extinguish yourself or your nation. So I want to ask the others how,
Greg and Henrik first, please.
Thank you very much for that important question. We are in no way claiming that virtue ethics is exclusive as an approach to this area, but it is too easily forgotten in our view. And there are two reasons that we think are important for asking what resources are within this tradition. The one is that this is the traditional language of military ethics. Some of us discussed during lunch whether it's actually efficient or not, whether it actually has any real, tangible consequence, but it's true that when you look at military training, it's often formulated in terms of virtue ethics. So with an increased use of artificial intelligence, we have to ask ourselves, so what do we do with that now? The traditional way of talking about courage or prudence or moderation, honor, how is that changed within this new setting? That's the one. The other is one that very interesting author Shannon Valor uses in her book on virtue and AI, namely that virtue ethics is a way of talking about ethics with deep resonance in other non-Western moral traditions. You find it in Asian and African traditions. She talks about Confucius, she talks about several Indian traditions which are much closer to what we in the West would call virtue ethics, an agent-centered ethics. What does it mean to be good? So we think it complements a rule-oriented ethics. And our final reason is basically that we want to concentrate on the human operator. What do we expect of the human operator of these new systems, and as we touched on also the dialogue that you have with these sorts of systems. So, the most obvious author to refer to, I guess, would be someone like Alistair McIntyre, who would claim that we have this language of virtue, but we don't really know what it means and how to actually employ it today, and that's what we're trying to challenge on. Finally, to your point about Christian morality and Christian ethics, virtue ethics plays, of course, a great role within the Christian tradition, not least within the Catholic tradition. So we think that this is also a way of utilizing that tradition. Greg, I don't know if you want to add something to that.
Okay, just a few quick things. We're not limiting the virtues to courage and moderation. Those are two examples, but there are a wider range of virtues. Second, our presentation had two parts. One had to do with whether the arguments for and against the introduction of AI in military settings, particularly lethal autonomous weapons. We actually didn't take sides in that debate. We presented what the two views are. For the purposes of the presentation, we remained agnostic. But I think regardless of where we land on it, the AI systems are going to increasingly be introduced into military settings, right? So we need to understand how they can be managed effectively. And particularly in collaborative settings where humans are acting with AI tools, we need to know what the consequences are going to be for the human agents. So like it or not, we have to, it again comes back to managing. And we think that the virtue perspective, which has a focus on agents and their maintenance of responsibility, that will be a fruitful avenue for thinking through this question of effective management. So.
Advanced in our time budget, but two more questions. Marcello, okay?
Only to say that if your awareness about the condemnation of the war that made Pope Francis, and for the first time, the Pope said the war, nuclear wars in a particular way, for the same reason of Thomas Aquinas, is immoral. The possession, the use and the possession of this kind of arms. So I think that we need to consider this. I don't see any virtue in make a war today. And also for the same reason of Thomas Aquinas, because Thomas Aquinas say it's the prince that need to take the decision to make the war. But what is the prince all today in the global war? This is the question. We don't have reasons to have really to justify a war today. In the sense of Thomas Aquinas. So.
Can I respond? I fully agree with Pope Francis, but the question is, until nuclear weapons are eliminated, we need to know how to manage the situation. All right, so deterrence is one of the ways that the situation is managed.
For me, deterrence is not the real thing that we don't have war. I think that deterrence is also the people in the beginning was in favor of deterrence, today are against deterrence. We live, as said John Paul II in his testament, only for a miracle of the providence, because in the contrary it's impossible to understand that in these last 70 years we don't have a war. So it's the providence, not the deterrence.
Yes, I understand the point, and also my kind of a profound kind of wish is that we achieve the world without nuclear weapons, and nuclear, as I said in the beginning, nuclear deterrence is somewhat the belief system in a way, and as long as nuclear weapons exist, somebody may want to exploit the existence of nuclear weapons. And then my thought is there may be a possibility, but that AI, by amplifying that question, many people realize the irrationality of the assumption that relies, and the people relies on to construct a discussion nuclear deterrence. So our maybe objectives for time being is to first demystify, how do you call it, the nuclear deterrence by discussing more about irrationality. But in order to achieve the goal, maybe we have to have practical steps. So then maybe our task is to think about these practical steps.
Thank you very much, and apologies I couldn't be in the morning, but my question is how intelligent is artificial intelligence? So how we know that what we are obtaining through artificial intelligence is really capturing all these potential strategies and behaviors that we can move and make decisions based on something that clearly there is not a metric behind to assess that. So when we use game theory and so on, we have models behind, we have assumptions that we can test and validate. But with artificial intelligence, it's something kind of a black box with some parameters there that how we can have a metric to be able to assess, because the level of risk we are going in this type of situations is so huge that I think we need to be a little bit careful on what we're using. And I don't know how much it has been validated, like for example, for events which are not necessarily nuclear events, but for other type of conflicts, how much these type of tools have been used to assess if they are really performing properly and predicting properly the behavior of the other players in the action.
I'm afraid we have to cut it here.
Yes.